Hey, thanks everyone for joining us. We are going to be kicking this off with Fiona and Nadej from EMEA over at Conductor, if I have that correct. And so I won't take up any more time. I know we're just getting this started off a little bit later, so sorry, ladies. But if you guys want to go ahead and run with it, please feel free. I'm going to go ahead and turn on my camera, but I'll be right here. So take it away.
Sounds good. Thank you everyone so much for joining. Sorry we are a few minutes late. We hit a few technical snags. So, what would the world be today without some hiccups trying to get things up and running? But glad you're all here to join us, and we're really excited to chat to you today. Just to introduce myself quickly, my name is Fiona McGovern, Senior Director of EMEA at Conductor, originally from the States, but based out of London. I've been over here for 4 years and working at Conductor for the last 8.5 years. So really excited to chat with everyone today about international SEO. I work with a lot of our large global customers and see constantly some of the challenges and hiccups. So happy to share a little bit of what we know and what we see. And I'll toss it over to you, Nadej.
Great. Hello, everyone. My name is Nadej Shafo. I'm the Director of Customer Success in EMEA. I started at Conductor 6 years ago in the New York office, moved over to EMEA or to the UK about 3 years ago, and now I'm based in Spain. I also help support all of our global enterprise customers. So this is a topic that we're very excited to talk through today, to talk through some of the technical aspects, content aspects and best practices around international SEO. And of course, for anybody who doesn't know, Conductor is a global SEO platform, so organic marketing platform. And our job is to ensure that all of our customers have all of the data that they need and to action on those insights and advance their organic marketing strategy.
Amazing. Thank you, Nadej. And as we mentioned, we're going to get into international SEO, top 10 tips. We're going to start with the technical challenges, then jump into the content challenges, and talk a little bit about selecting a solution. We'll also hopefully have some time at the end to do a quick Q&A. But if you don't have time to stick around for that, or if we don't get to it too much, you also have our contact details here, fiona@conductor.com and nadej@conductor.com. If you want to reach out, if you have any questions, if we didn't get to something that you've been sitting on, feel free to reach out. And of course, this is just a snapshot when we're thinking about international SEO, talking about the top 10 tips. It certainly doesn't cover everything, but you will be able to download our ebook afterwards, and we'll follow up with a link to that so that you can get into all of the details and weeds if there's anything that we don't get to today. But jumping right into it, we wanted to kick off with a poll, but I apologize. I think it's not working due to our technical difficulties. So we'll have to skip that for now. But what we were interested in hearing was from all of the attendees, how many different, there we go, it's working. How many different country language combinations are you targeting with your website? We, of course, with our existing customer base and different companies that we see, a lot of variation across the board in terms of how you're set up, how you're scaling. So we're curious for the attendees today, how many different country language combinations are you targeting with your website? So if you have a minute and just fill that in, and we'll get a chance to look at that and see the distribution. So jumping right into the technical aspect, I don't want to hold us up too much because I know we are a little short on time. Global SEO. This isn't going to be news to anyone, but global SEO is critically important to any organization with a business, with a website. You're going to want to ensure that you're not only doing well in your headquarters in your primary location, but also that you're prime and set up for expansion, that you're going to be able to do well in new markets, in new areas, and connect with an audience outside of your current headquarters or original country. And it's really important that, similar to everything that we talk about in terms of like an in-store experience or a customer service experience, you're going to want to ensure that it's a unified experience across markets, that people are familiar with your site, with your brand, with the experience on your site, and that it's really a seamless experience from a customer standpoint. So global SEO is critically important to ensuring that your customer is having a good experience no matter where they are in the world. They're connecting with your brand and really able to get to what they need from you through your site. So this comes in a lot of different ways. One of the critical and key aspects in terms of getting started is going to be your site structure. For anyone who's maybe further along in terms of their global expansion or setup, this may seem a little bit repetitive, but it's critically important foundationally to ensure that your site is set up in the proper way. And there are a number of key ways that you can do this. The ideal and probably best scenario is going to be ccTLDs. So you'll see those examples there, example.fr, example.de. Subdomains where the actual country is set up on a subdomain, so fr.example, and then we finally have subdirectories, example.com/fr. Again, it's critically important because this goes back to the whole experience of how people end up finding your site, what their experience is, and how you're performing, what the competition is, depending on what the actual URL setup and site structure is. One of the things that we'll get into a little bit more as well is from a budgeting standpoint, sometimes organizations want to take a shortcut, but it's not always recommended if your brand and your organization is really trying to be set up for prime global success and expansion. So you really want to consider that foundationally when you're starting out. And what do we see in terms of where you are at today? To give a quick measurement of like, how are we doing with this? There are some key things that we see related to 3 of those different options. For ccTLDs, we typically see this with large global brands, organizations that have decided that this global, doing well in multiple markets is critically important to their business. They've invested in setting up ccTLDs. For the subdirectory route, that's going to be more so organizations that are targeting international regions, but it may not be a top priority. The business may have not said, we're definitely investing in this and investing heavily. And then subdomain, you can think about this as exploring, kind of dipping your toe in the water. So obviously it all comes with different implications in terms of resources, cost, and of course, the priorities of the business and what you're putting forward. But just something to consider in terms of the state of your organization, what you're thinking about next, and where you might stand out of all of these. Taking it one step further is the language consideration. Critically important, and we'll get into a little bit more detail on this as well, is thinking about what do you want the version of your site to be focused on, country or language targeted. And luckily, Google gives us all of the direction in terms of what you really need to be doing there. You notice there's links included throughout all of this, so you'll be able to access and get more detail on the advanced crawling localized versions and what's recommended based on your current setup. Again, it comes back to cost and resources and investment as well when you're thinking from a language perspective, because you want to ensure that you're giving the audience a really good experience in terms of what they're consuming from a language perspective. That your translation or transcreation is well done and allowing everyone to get what they need from you. And one of the most important points we want to think about when we're thinking about global SEO is hreflang implementation. This part is critically important. So as many or mostly, hopefully all of you know, hreflang is an HTML attribute used to specify the language and geographical targeting of your site. If this isn't done correctly, you have a lot of internal cannibalization. Perhaps your US site is outranking your UK site. Your French site is outranking your Moroccan site, whatever it may be, it can create a lot of issues. And it's really important that you have indicated to Google which actual web property should be ranking based on that, language country combination. So really critically important because again, it comes back to that customer experience. If there is someone, trying to make a purchase in the UK and they're being directed to the US site and can't do that, we certainly don't want that happening. And that's what not focusing on hreflang can kind of leave you with. And when we think about hreflang errors, we have just given a few quick snapshots to think about how do we typically see these manifest themselves? What are the typical snags that come up? The first one is going to be missing return links. In order for hreflang to be correctly implemented, it requires that every line of hreflang has a reciprocal link back. So that's going to be the first and most common, I would say, error that we see. So you're going to want to check that. The next is incorrect language codes. This seems like an easy one to get right, but it can mess you up. You have to stick by the formal ISO description for the language code, so that makes sure that it's accurate. A common mistake is obviously putting UK rather than GB for the UK. Language encoding, it must also match the hreflang designation. So again, you're going to want to make sure that all of those details are in there correctly, that it's ENGB rather than ENUS, and make sure that you're not kind of tripping yourself up there. You really have to get this right to make sure that you're indicating to Google exactly what should be happening. And then country code without language. All tags must include a language. This is definitely not something you want to miss because it's critically important and will ultimately mean that the hreflang hasn't been implemented correctly, and you could potentially have that experience of someone trying to make a purchase and it's not happening for them because they're being directed to the wrong country. So that's kind of a snapshot of some of the most common hreflang errors. So definitely a few things to take into consideration. One of the other things we wanted to look at really quickly, just rounding out the technical section, is search engine market share differences. It's really important when you're looking at new markets and targeting new regions to have an understanding of what is the dominant search engine within this market. We see a lot of different markets that actually have not a lot, I would say a handful of markets that have Google as a non-dominant search engine. This is certainly something you want to be aware of, specifically for South Korea, China, Czechia, Russia, because it allows you to really get an understanding of what is the dominant search engine and how do we potentially have to shift or tweak our strategy depending on what that dominant search engine is, because not in every market is a Google, and you definitely want to be aware of those differences and building a strategy around the dominant search engine so that you can perform well. That was like a speed round of tech SEO, just so we can get caught up on time. But I'll toss it over to Nadej now to jump into the global content SEO.
Great, wonderful. Thanks, Fiona. And I just wanted to call out in the poll results, it looks like 78% of you are managing about 1 to 5 country language combinations, but we even have 4% of you that are managing 50 plus. So a very large range here. Excited that you're all here with us today, and hope at least some of this can be relevant to everyone. So I'm going to be talking about content SEO and different best practices in terms of optimizing your content internationally. So just a quick definition, everyone's probably very aware of this, but there's a very big difference between translation and transcreation. Translation is word for word transcription of content from one language to another. And then transcreation, however, is when we start to take into account the different local cultural context. That means that the intent, the style, the culture, this can all change depending on who your audience is, even though they are speaking the same language. And personas that we're targeting and the type of people who are going to be our customers in one market versus another might actually be very different as well. So with this in mind, there's different options for localizing content. The first one is just using a free tool such as Google Translate, or my favorite actually is DeepL. I'm an American living in Spain, so I always need a really good translation tool, and it's the one that I use because it actually is a lot better than what Google Translate spits out. But there's a lot of different tools, and they're usually either free or very low cost to use. And you can very easily scale into many different languages because it's very low cost. The problem, of course, is that we're going to be missing a lot of the cultural nuances, and we can't ensure necessarily that you are able to build that trust in that local market, that you are a brand that operates and is familiar with that market from a very intimate perspective. You can also, on another hand, use local SEO experts, whether freelancers or agencies, to actually do your localize your keyword research and transcreate your content. This is great because you're really going to be ensuring that you are speaking like a local, that your website, the context, the nuances are really aligned to that local market. Of course, the drawback of this is that it can get very costly. It's going to cost each time that you're going to transcreate and localize into that different market is going to add on to the cost of that strategy. But there's also a third strategy. This third strategy is best for large organizations that have in-market teams. And I've seen this rolled out quite successfully across some of our larger global brands. It's to upskill your in-market teams on SEO to actually do the localization of your keywords and your content. If you can do this, this is a wonderful long-term strategy in-house. And really what you're doing is you're leveraging not only locals who knew the market the best, but also your own teams that know the brand the best. So you're really getting the best of both worlds. Now, it is definitely, this is definitely first on dependent on if you have those market teams. And then second of all, this is definitely a very large, heavy lift at the beginning to ensure that all of these local marketers are upskilled onto SEO. This will ensure that, so basically, if this is the strategy that you're choosing, either you or your team is going to have to become kind of professional educators in the SEO, on SEO for a lot of regional marketers that may not have just SEO on their plate and who are also focusing on a lot of different other channels. So it is not only initial heavy lift, but also a long-term kind of educational project. But if you're really looking to be serious about really optimizing your presence in different markets, this is definitely the best strategy. So moving on from here, why is transcreation important over translation? I think there's 3 reasons. Number one, how people search can be different. First of all, here we just have a very quick example. I'm using US versus UK, of course, 2 English markets. But you can see for the shoes industry or sneakers in the US, it's called sneakers, whereas in the UK, we're calling it trainers. You can see there a very large search volume difference when we're looking at the 2 phrases. Also, what people care about can be different in those different markets. So this is just an example of people also ask results in the US versus the UK when we're looking at summer sneakers or summer trainers. In the US, you can see that there's, what are the cool sneakers, which shoes are good for the summer, and what are the cool shoes at the moment. And then in the UK, when we're looking for summer trainers, there's actually some really specific, very UK questions like, which trainers does Kate Middleton wear? And can sneakers be even, and what are the most popular trainers in the UK? So you will find definitely people are trying to figure out, especially when they're looking at like style or something like that, they want to know like what's in style in my country. And you'll see this a lot where you can see that the smaller countries that use that language, or the smaller markets using that language, you'll see a lot more of those geo-modifier terms. Like you'll see not only, let's say, sweaters, but you'll see like sweaters UK, right? So a lot of markets, because of a lot of international cannibalization that happens, you will see in smaller markets using the same language as a bigger market that there's a lot of those geo-modified keyword terms. Again, which is why it's very important to also be transcreating your keyword sets to understand how people are searching in that market. And then the third reason is that who you are competing with can be different. This is very obvious, but you're going to have different, especially if like you're in e-commerce, you're going to have very different retailers that you're competing with in one market versus another. And this is why it's also very important to make sure that you are targeting the localized term, because I'll stick with this example of trainers, right? So if I am a predominantly US brand and I'm using sneakers everywhere and I'm showing up for the term trainers in the UK, if I'm competing with all of these other, let's say I make it onto the first page, right? If I'm competing with all of these other websites that are targeting trainers and the people, and I'm a user in the UK, I'm going to actually probably gravitate towards the phrase that is my local, like colloquial way of saying it, because that's going to confirm to me that is a website that actually operates in my country and that I can definitely buy from. So Again, it's very important to make sure that you're using that localized phrase, because if you're not, the competitors in that country will be, and it'll be very easy to fall down the rankings. All right, and then very important with content SEO, I mean, with international SEO in general, it's critical to measure and report on progress. Apart from just creating the right content, optimizing yourself technically, it's really crucial to set up reporting where you can compare how different markets are performing and measure the changes, as well as share those successes across different markets. KPIs do get super complex when you start to take global SEO strategy into account. So this means that even before, it's important that you are really considering which KPIs are going to work at a global scale or across multiple markets. And then it's important that you can also get to all of the data you need to at that international scale. So as your business scales into multiple markets, ensure that you're tracking and that the platforms that you're using also scale with you. And we're going to talk about selecting the best solution for you for international SEO, but we have another poll here. Let me just launch it. So the question is, when you think of international SEO, what is the most important functionality that you're looking for in a platform? I will leave that open for responses for just a minute. Great. All right, so some initial responses have come in. It looks like 50% say that keyword research. Oh, sorry, things are changing. Oh, wait, one more second. Yep, we still have a leader of the pack, which is keyword research. When you're looking for when you're thinking of international SEO, the most important functionality in a platform. But very close contenders are competitive analysis and technical SEO. Wonderful. I'm going to close that poll there. All right. So let's talk about all the factors to consider. So very important, ensure that the platform that you choose covers all of your key markets and also supports expansion. What does that mean? Not necessarily that just the platform can support every location that you currently exist in, but also if you are a growing business, if your business is continuing to expand in multiple markets, just make sure that you can also, that platform can grow with you. So even if you only operate in 5 today, you may still want to go with a platform that can support a lot more than just those 5 in case you're going to grow. The other thing is what does it entail? And it's a good thing to consider when you are choosing a platform, is how easy is it to do keyword research, as we were just talking about, one of the most important factors. How easy is it to do research or to get some level of data in different countries that you might not be operating fully in, but will be expanding into in the future? So again, think about the future, think about longevity. A lot of platforms, of course, it's really important to have historical data tracking. So when you choose that, depending on your size today, think into the future and ensure that all of your main search engines can be supported. The second one is make sure that you're aligning your platform configuration to your team structure. So ensure that you are, whether your team is a centralized team where you need to see everything in one place, or you have different teams that need to see different sets of data, ensure that your platform has the capability to just show the views to the right people. Make sure as well that there's a lot of flexibility in breaking out the data as well as rolling up the data. So what that means is that not only that you have coverage on all of the metrics that you need, but make sure that you have the flexibility in viewing the data both market by market or language by language or region by region, as well as rolling that up and being able to compare the performance of market versus market. So if you have a global team and local teams, that means you're going to need that capability to see both the separation and the roll-up views at the same time, as well as usage and view provisioning. So ensure that, if it's really important that one market cannot see another market's data. You'll have to consider that as well when you're choosing your global SEO solution. The third one, which we already kind of discussed, but it's important to first determine, I think even before you're looking and considering your SEO platforms, what are those global, regional, and local KPIs? And then make sure that the platform that you choose can source all of that. Ideally, you'll want to go with something that can source as many of the KPIs as possible. Of course, it might never be possible to get every single KPI answered by one single platform. Sometimes a combination of platforms is needed. But ideally, you want to have as much of the data as you can in one place so that you can build those reports into the platform that you have. That kind of, again, is as comprehensive as possible, especially if you're thinking of giving access to like teams globally and local markets. You want to keep it simple, and you want to make sure that most of the information can be found in one place, rather than having to log into 50 different tools. Especially if you're enabling your local marketers with SEO knowledge, you want to make that as easy as possible. Fourth, monitor and prioritize technical issues. Yes, just really important. Ensure that you have a platform that is that you can really dig into. First of all, that can meet the scale of your website and the different country language combinations that you have, and it's important to ensure that that is information that you can get to very quickly and that you can get to at that global level. And then the keyword strategy. So once you do select a tool, once you think about your keyword strategy, not only do you want to ensure that you're covering all of the relevant keywords in each market, but you also want to think about standardizing those keywords. So basically, you might have a market that's a much larger market where you're tracking, let's say, 5,000, 10,000 keywords, and a smaller market where you only need 3,000. But if that's the case, and if your keywords are differing market by market, I would always recommend make sure that you have a core reporting set. You need to always have an apples for apples comparison between the different markets. So even if the scale of your tracking is different across your different markets, you want to ensure that you can have a very the KPIs can be like translated across each market. And then lastly, set up automated reporting to monitor your progress against goals. Yes, as much as you can automate, especially as you scale and the more markets that you have, you want to ensure that you can get that data on a regular basis, and not have to dig around for that data every month for your reporting needs. All right, I think that is it. Skip here. I think we are now just heading into Q&A.
Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes. Hi, Heather.
Hi. Hey, fashionably late. Isn't that what they say? Sorry about that. It has been one of those days. So awesome. So great stuff. Thank you all very much. So we really only have one question. So I would love to see, some more questions come in. And it looks like, did you all answer that? About 2 weeks ago, I changed my server from US to Sao Paulo, Brazil. After that, my keywords started to rank and drop. Now I lose 6th position. Is that normal? How long can that recovery take? And so it looks like, Fiona, that you already kind of answered that, but do you want to expand on that at all?
Yeah, of course. I was jumping in just to get an understanding of if those rankings had dropped locally or not. I also provided some resources. I mean, I would definitely check out in more detail some of the key things that we see. Number one, what is the structure of the URL? Is the site targeting people in Brazil or in the US? And just taking some of those things into account. And also if the keyword rank drops were locally or how those were impacted. Because I think typically, that's not going to be a huge ding on you, but there's definitely some things that you want to dig in there to make sure they're set up correctly so that you can understand what's happening.
Yeah, and another thing with the IP, generally, if you're moving your server into the local market, that should be a beneficial thing, but it could be something with the timing. 2 weeks ago, there was also a major core Google algorithm update, so it might be worth digging into that and to see. I would definitely try to take a look at what pages were hit and what keywords you were hit to hit on to see, to start to investigate, are there any patterns? So if you start to see a pattern of it's a certain type of keyword or a certain type of page type where you started to lose visibility, it could also be an indication that you were hit by that algorithm update.
Yeah, that's a really, really good point. Yeah.
Great. So, question from Sophia. What's your take on CDN and how should we go about it when recommending it to a client?
CDN is a content delivery network, I'm assuming. Fiona, do you have any thoughts on that?
Oh, Fiona, sorry, you're on mute.
Sorry. Nadej knows I really think that's like an epic fail. Like it can't happen anymore. So when I do it, which it does happen. But I actually, yeah, I don't have any big opinion on CDN specifically or using a content delivery network.
Okay. So question from Katie, what do you look for when reviewing keyword research work of local language speakers when you actually don't speak the language?
Very good question. Yes. If you do have, again, if there's anyone else in the company that does have local language expertise, I would recommend passing it to them for a quick look over. But really what you have to rely on, because I work with a lot of customers that are tracking a lot of keywords in other languages that I have, no idea even how to read. Let's say Japanese, Russian, it's completely out of my wheelhouse. What I'm always looking for is I'm looking at the data points. So I'm looking at the monthly search volume. I'm looking at what other competitors are ranking for that. So our rank position, our competitors' rank position. So you really have to, if you don't have any language resources, what I would recommend is that you really have to just rely on those other points of data to get that input to understand, is there really that search volume? Who else is ranking for that? So is it relevant? And what's our rank position? Are competitors ranking for it? That's probably going to be the best way. And I would recommend, if you are, the clearer the brief, the better your results will be when you get them back as well. So as long as you have, as long as you're providing a really good seed list that's very clear and that also is like categorized and things like that, the better your seed list is to that agency or localization partner, the better the results you'll get from that.
Great. Okay, question from Ryan. What is the best approach for setting up canonical tags and alternate tags when you may be publishing the same content across multiple international sections?
Fiona, I think it's a technical question. Do you have a feedback on that? I have some thoughts as well.
Sorry, no, I missed it.
What is the best approach for setting up canonical tags and alternate tags when you might be publishing the same content across multiple international sections?
Yeah, I mean, I think it kind of depends. Do you mean, I wish I could ask him, if it's like the exact same content? Or if
It does say the same content. So let's say it's the same. I mean,
Yeah.
Is that a cause for concern?
Yeah, I definitely think you want to consider, creating like localized content and really making sure, again, that the experience is targeting that particular market. So that's really, really important to make sure that, the content is appropriate for that particular market.
Okay.
So kind of copying and pasting the same content I wouldn't recommend across different markets.
Yeah, sure. Nadej, anything to add to that?
Nope. All set there.
So question from Lindsay. How do you think, duplicate content, how do you think about duplicate content on the same language versions of page targeting across different global regions? So is there's a standard level of differentiation that you aim for in both body copy as well as, the navigated, templated elements?
Sorry, I'm just reading the question. Duplicate content on same language versions of a page targeting different global regions. Is it? Yeah. So, well, here's the thing. If the language is the same, so you ideally want to have, like, it needs to be as localized as possible. You don't need to differentiate the content. In fact, you want to have the content to be actually quite similar. So, and then you want to just apply those hreflang tags. As long as you apply your hreflang tags, even if you have the exact same copy, not at all localized, it's still gonna, Google's not gonna consider that duplicate content, because it's gonna understand that one version of the page is targeting one versus the other. So in terms of how much you need to differentiate, only differentiate as much as that language variation or that market is different from the other market, if that makes sense. So like for the UK, you want to change all of those O's, like color O to OU, but it's not that you want to create a different article. You actually want to have the same content in each market, then just localize at that appropriate level, and then with the hreflang tags on top, so that Google understands that it's not a duplicate.
So Rossi is asking, how important is hosting now in relation to targeting different markets? It obviously helps to be hosted in the biggest market, but if you're dealing with many countries, how do you handle it feasibly?
Yes. Well, I mean, ideally, you want to also check to see, I would just make sure that you're monitoring your core web vitals and understanding how you're performing in different markets. Ensure that you have a crawler that, sometimes it's nice to do some testing to just check to see what is the speed of delivery in different markets. So if you do have a crawler where you can switch kind of the IP address of that, you can do some testing there to see how much of a difference it makes. You don't necessarily have to host in each country. I mean, it also depends on your website as well, so it's a little bit difficult to answer that as like a broad statement. But I would definitely, if you can, do some testing and to see if your performance is really differing in different markets, even some of those smaller ones.
Great. So Kirthi is asking, what about any useful insights on B2B focused global SEO? So just any kind of, takeaways that they can walk away that are B2B focused.
Yeah, I think one of the main things with global SEO that we see consistently from an organizational perspective, what's definitely applicable to B2B, is making sure that there's a good upfront investment, that the organization understands, if these markets are a priority for the organization, do we have the CCTLDs? Do we have the site set up? Have we thought, about the content creation in different languages? How are we targeting and actually making sure that there's a good, experience for the audience, regardless of who they are, across different markets. So I think from a B2B perspective, it's just making sure that that investment is there. And again, that the experience is high quality. And that's really going to come down to, do you have the right URL structure? Do you have the hreflang tag implementation in place? Have you thought about the content and localizing it as well, making sure that you're not only, talking from your core perspective, but also thinking about that particular market. With anything, you're going to want to, make sure that it's a good experience within that particular market. We see it even, across Europe, different markets can have a totally different experience, different expectations. People are different. How do you make sure that not only are you setting things up from an experience on the site, that it's technically healthy and the content's working, but also thinking about that audience and making sure that it's localized in all those ways that's going to, make you successful. And I think that goes for B2B or B2C, but really just considering, the investment and really doing that. And when it comes to the investment as well, I think it's about showing the organization what's the potential, why does that matter? People can very easily walk into a store and say that's a bad experience, but if they consider, another international market and people experiencing your website and really not getting what they need, it's just as bad, if not worse, given, how much of the audience you're driving from an online perspective. So very general answer, but yeah.
So Amanda asks, what is your number one tip when it comes to balancing international and local US based SEO? Also, a little bit of advice when using GA if there's a conflict. So using Google Analytics if there's a conflict with GDPR.
Oh, sorry, Nadej, were you going to say something?
Just going to say, number one tip, it's really difficult to like narrow it down to a number one tip, but I would say at least from the main point is that you have visibility. So it might be that the US is such a big market for you that that the other markets or the international SEO that you're targeting can really easily fall to the wayside. So what I would really recommend is that depending on the size of the team, depending on how much you can, take on your plate, ensure that at least you have a very solid baseline of what I would call like core keywords or core metrics for the different markets that you're monitoring on a regular basis. Even if a lot of your efforts still have to go into the US because it is the biggest market and it's really difficult to spend time on that international SEO, as long as you have the monitoring in place to ensure that you are able to see and have that visibility on, is there something that's dropping in another market, or is there a large opportunity in another market? You need to have that data behind that to back that up so that you can make that smart business decision of where to focus your efforts. And then in terms of the GA conflict with GDPR, yes, a lot of our customers in EMEA are seeing a lot of tracking issues and incorrect data in GA, but luckily with the transition to GA4, that should do away with a lot of those issues. So I would recommend making sure that you're migrating to GA4 as soon as possible.
Great. So question from Jason. You mentioned preferred URL structure is ccTLD. In this case, how would you address the potential benefits of utilizing the domain rank of the global domain with subfolders for each country?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good point. You can also definitely go the route of a global domain with subfolders for each country, and it can really work quite well and be seamless for you. I would say the majority of experience we have with organizations that have ccTLDs are, teams where they've really developed in country. They have a real focus on that market. It makes sense for them to have a ccTLD. A lot of them even have a dedicated local SEO for that organization within that market. So in that particular instance, I mean, that's from my perspective, some of the breakdown that I see in terms of how organizations go about it. If it is really important to you, you may want to go the route of ccTLD. Otherwise, you can definitely work on the global domain subfolder structure. It's absolutely going to, in many instances, give you, the same results, depending on, how you're doing in terms of the investment and what's the overall like competition within that particular market. But yeah, if there's a lot of authority within the global domain, that's definitely a good route as well.
Another kind of technical question from Simone. Have you ever dealt with a sudden indexing jump in valid pages for a language subfolder like /CA without any associated changes in the code and an associated increase, then steep drop in the hreflang count in Google Search Console? Did you get that?
Yeah, I've just found where the questions are. So
yeah, I was going to say it might be easier to kind of read through that one.
Yeah, sudden indexing jump in valid pages for language subfolder without any such changes in the code. I don't think I have, but I'd be interested in looking into that. If you wanted to follow up and send over the example, I could definitely check it out for you, maybe with a little bit more detail to see what's happening there. Nadej, I don't know if you've seen anything like that.
Definitely one for us to investigate.
Okay. So question from Valda. Any best practices for a URL for a global site that houses common info for all regions while also having a ccTLDs for local sites?
Any best practices for you? Yeah, I think that really, from my perspective, if I am understanding the question correctly, the best practices, you'd want to think about if you have ccTLDs for local sites, but you also have a global sites with info for all regions, you want to think about who do you want ranking for those particular keywords? Who is the audience? Who is that content for? What is the query? And is that something that, the global site should be answering that's for all regions, or something that the local experience should be? So it's really kind of breaking that down and understanding what's the purpose of this particular site. Of course, it goes back to that issue of, potentially having some internal cannibalization. So when you're very clear on like the global site, exists for this purpose to answer these questions, and then the local site exists for this purpose to answer these questions, it's a helpful differentiation, I think, in terms of like best practices. So you want to think about, the structure, the setup, the content on each of those, how it's focused. I mean, we have, some customers who have a global site that's more of a informational top level, and then local sites that are more focused on products and local experience. So really just thinking about what are the different keywords, what's the different audience, because if you have different sites, ultimately they probably have different purposes and exist for different people. So just making sure that you're not like stepping on your toes when you're doing all of that. And that really comes down to thinking about the content structure and the keyword. So I would say for best practices, go back to the focus area of why does this exist? Who is it for? What's the structure of the site? And start from that foundation to break it down. Of course, you may see some internal cannibalization depending obviously on the, authority of the global brand. But and in some instances, it may be okay if it is outranking the local site, but just something that you definitely want to keep an eye on. And from a business perspective, really think about, what's the experience, who is that site for, and how are you putting that into the best practices of everything that you're doing in terms of rolling it out for the consumer or the audience.
Perfect. I think with that, we've reached about the end of the questions.
It was one other quick question I saw that I just replied to is about Core Web Vitals.
Perfect.
And I think the question was specifically thinking about, how do you actually test and measure Core Web Vitals? And it is always going to be from where that user is, what the experience is. I think it was talking about where the site is hosted or if it's the actual user. But I replied, but just to think about that, it's always the experience of the user. So you're going to want to think about that. That's how you're going to check that everything's working well versus the IP.
Awesome. Are there any others that maybe I did kind of skip over that you saw, or anything else that you want to leave everybody with today?
I feel like I missed one when I didn't know where the questions were. But maybe we can come back to those. If anyone definitely had a question, you didn't get an answer, I'd love to follow up. I know we had the one question of the drop in href lang and that shift. That's something, we'd look into a little bit further. But I didn't have anything else that I noticed on my side, though, besides that.
I think there is one. Do we need to reference country as well as language all the time? And then in that case, do we need to break out each language for each? I'm losing the questions now.
That's, yep. I think when we answer them, they do go into the answer tab, and they might have.
Oh.
We're having some tech issues today, and I really do apologize to everybody who's out there, because I was looking at them too, because I saw them flip in there and then they were gone.
Yes, apologies. Well, we can always answer some of these afterwards as well. I think we have a problem of disappearing questions here today. Apologies.
So with that, I would say let's wrap this up. All of the questions are recorded in the system, so we will get those all over to you. So Fiona, Nadej, thank you for being here with us. Tell the people where to find you.
Yeah, so my name again is Fiona McGovern. You can find me on LinkedIn. My name on LinkedIn is actually Fiona Nora McGovern, and my email address is fiona@conductor.com. So quite easy. Feel free to send me a note or add me on LinkedIn as well.
Yes, and my name is Nadej Shafo again. You can find me on LinkedIn. I think I'm one of the only Nadej Shafos in the world, so it should be pretty easy to find me. Or you can email me at nadej@conductor.com.
That's awesome. That's awesome. I'll never be the only Heather Campbell, but I wish I could experience that just once, Nadej. But with that, everybody, thank you for bearing with us today. Thank you for all the questions and the participation. Ladies, thank you. It was great having you. We'll see you on the next webinar.
Take care.
Thank you.